we're going to see the number go way, way, way up.
What are we, about an hour into this? And you finally said what people tuned in to hear. People may want to hear number go up, but they're going to get a lot more than that on this episode of the MN Blockchain Conversations podcast. From here in Minneapolis at the Quantum Lex studio, we had Bitcoin expert, writer, speaker, and VP of operations for Swan Bitcoin, Brandon Quittem, in our studio. We talked about the nature of money, the impact of Bitcoin mining, and the future of Bitcoin adoption in the world. Oh yeah, and whether the price would continue to go up. We zeroed in, we scaled back, and we saw the big picture of Bitcoin. Enjoy. Given that our audience is like chain agnostic and you live in the Bitcoin world, let's zero in on Bitcoin, right? Let's almost like pretend all that other activity, all that other noise, maybe that's how you'd put it, I don't know.
Mostly noise.
Yeah, is kind of gone, and let's just sort of zoom in on Bitcoin. But at the same time, let's go big, because people look at the price every day. They look at the chart from 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, and I was just thinking driving here, like, actually even in the weeks leading up to this conversation, that it seems to me from Bitcoiners' perspective, things in the year by decade progress of this technology are kind of going as hoped or as planned. And is that your perspective? And if so, talk a little bit more about that, because I think people miss the big picture with this.
Yeah, I think no matter what you do, if you go back 5 years and you look at the most bullish predictions, it's exceeding everyone's wildest expectations. And I would say the biggest thing that was pulled forward, in my opinion, was the nation state's posture towards Bitcoin.
Yeah.
If you go back 5 years, rightly so, the largest risk to Bitcoin was, okay, if it is what you say it is, won't the powers that be just shut it down once it gets big enough? Totally legitimate. I would originally, 5 years ago, I would defend Bitcoin by saying, yes, but it was designed to withstand a nation state level attack. Deep down inside, did I have 100% confidence in that? No. If we go back to like 2010, 11, 12, 13 era, early Bitcoin period, I think if the state really wanted to, they could have squashed it. They could have put everyone in jail, did a bunch of shady stuff, and really at least delayed it by 10, 20, 30 years, if not outright nuked it. However, every year that Bitcoin survives from that point forward, the risk of nation state attacks go down.
Yeah.
Then we have a situation where nation states are fighting over buying it, producing strategic Bitcoin reserves. We have many countries now that have Bitcoin on the balance sheet and many more coming. And so the biggest risk all of a sudden became a giant tailwind pushing Bitcoin forward. And I think that's the right context to frame the conversation. The first 10, 15 years was the early days, call it bootstrapping phase, a lot of risk, crazy returns for those who had the foresight and who could stomach that volatility.
Yeah.
However, a corresponding risk associated with that. At this point, I would say Bitcoin's largely de-risked, and there's still a lot of upside. I think I came for the gains, mostly in the crypto crowd, also in the Bitcoin crowd. They would say that Bitcoin's growth trajectory is really low right now, looking forward. Okay. Meaning, if you want to make money, you got to go chase altcoins and trade and get lucky.
Yeah.
I think that's totally wrong. I think Bitcoin's at around 2 trillion market cap today. I think in today's money, the total addressable market is more like 1 to 200 trillion. I think 100 trillion is a conservative estimate
of
in the next 20 years.
Okay.
So call it a 50x from here, I think is conservative over the 10, 20-year time frame. And so if you need more than a 50x on that time frame, you have something wrong with yourself, and you should slow down and think longer term.
Yeah.
That's an astronomical rate.
Slow down and think longer term. That's a tough thing to ask of people in this industry.
Correct.
I think it's a tough thing to ask of people, period.
I agree.
Because Trump puts a tariff out, and it might be a boneheaded idea. It might be a great idea. I don't know. I'm not an economist. But if it has volatility in the first day or week, people are just I think that's what makes the internet almost incompatible with we'll talk a little bit about nation state and societal stability a little later in this conversation, but I think it's what makes it hard, because these are long-term initiatives, and it's hard to withstand immediate resistance. Now, Bitcoin as a technology and without a founder, or at least an anonymous founder, doesn't have that immediate like pressure, I guess. So it's able to withstand, I don't know, naysayers and all that. But anyway, let's go back to Bitcoin. So I remember hearing in like 2014, 15, like one politician saying, well, wait a minute, if this is a threat to the dollar. And I remember, I think it was a guy saying this on like Capitol Hill, and Bitcoiners on Twitter were like, "Oh my gosh, he actually gets it. No one cares," right? But they don't see what he sees. He's kind of like the Cassandra in the political sense of the political establishment, but they don't get it. You're right. Like not enough of them saw it. And I'm with you that if they did, they could have killed it the same way they didn't kill BitTorrent, no, Pirate Bay, right? But they effectively made it unpopular so that I don't know.
I'll take a counterpoint on this one.
I know people pirate, but I don't know anyone. Well, I maybe know a couple people that are really into media and hacking and stuff, and so they do it without, they feel that they have no risk. But just about everyone just pays the money for Netflix or iTunes or whatever. Streams their music for free on YouTube.
That's the key.
And the
government did nothing to stop peer-to-peer file sharing.
Well, they did through Napster.
I mean,
lawsuits anyway.
They take down one, Napster, and then file sharing BitTorrent takes over, and you can't stop BitTorrent. And what happened was streaming became cheap and widely available.
Yeah.
So the consumer preferences shifted. If it's $10 to use Spotify, I don't need to pirate music.
Right.
If it's $10 to get my movies from Netflix, I don't need to pirate video files.
Yeah.
And so I think the government may want to take some credit, just like the police officers who confiscate $1,000 worth of drugs and they post it on the internet and they're like, look at how badass we are. When you look at the drug consumption or trafficking on any sort of metric, it's just exponential. And so they're not even affecting the demand. I think that's absolutely the same case with peer-to-peer file sharing. Yes, they did set an example of some people, throw them in jail, similar to Ross Ulbricht in the Silk Road in the early Bitcoin days. They threw the book at him. Now he's free. Wonderful to see. And I think it's similar with Bitcoin as well. Is Bitcoin a threat to the dollar? Not directly. Maybe over the longest term possible, it could be. But I think the real threats to the dollar are systemic trade imbalance, identified a long time ago as the Triffin's dilemma, where if you're the global reserve currency, which we are after World War II, in order to facilitate the amount of dollar demand abroad, you need to be a net importer of goods. And so the imbalance there means that the U.S. put our manufacturing base to low-cost labor abroad, which means our jobs go there. Multinational corporations in the U.S. get to take advantage of labor arbitrage. American citizens benefit in one way, which is cheaper goods. Finance class benefits, coastal elites benefits, tech benefits. But the average middle-class American suffers under that trade imbalance. What we're seeing now is that global trade starting to fray. And it's not a new thing. Globalism, defined as trade as a percentage of GDP, had peaked around 08-09. And so we've been declining in globalization since. I think Trump essentially took the position that we have a train going full speed off the cliff. We don't know when it's going to go off the cliff, but it will. And at some point, we have to make a hard decision to reorder global trade, to sort of re-onshore manufacturing and level the playing field with trade abroad. Now, is this the right timing? Did he go about it the right way? There's a lot of room to debate tactics, strategy, and what the outcome inevitably will be. But I will give the administration credit for tackling it head on, knowing, of course, they knew it was going to be a risky financial move. But the alternative is much, much riskier, which is that U.S. debt, sovereign debt becomes so large that our currency hyperinflates, competitor nations or peer nations stop buying our debt, which is already happening, which forces us to monetize our debt, which again accelerates our currency debasement. And so in that world, we're essentially saying we don't want a sovereign debt crisis, which is global calamity, horrible for everyone. we're going to take it on the chin right now, accept some short-term pain, and hope we can get out of this long-term with a new structured financial arrangement abroad. And under those contexts, yeah, it's a very politicized environment. Everyone's an expert on Twitter. Everyone has opinions. I wouldn't take any of the short-term noise as a very strong signal. I don't think anyone should or could have confidence in the short term, but I think the direction is right. And in this context, Bitcoin emerges as a global, sovereign, neutral reserve asset. Okay, if the US and China do business together, do we do business in dollars or in yuan? If Russia wants to sell commodities, what currency are they using? Middle East selling oil, what currency are they using? Right? There's the BRICS upstart potential. China's trying to create their version of this thing to impose their will abroad. And Bitcoin stands alone as the single asset that is non-sovereign. And this provides huge benefits for trade. This provides huge benefits for anyone who doesn't like the US dollar imperialism. Because we have the global reserve currency, we could effectively sanction any country in the world. Essentially, we weaponize the dollar against them. That's our privilege. And people start to wake up and notice it. In the beginning of the Russia-Ukraine war, what happened? We sanctioned a bunch of Russian oligarchs. We confiscated their U.S. Treasury balances in London banks, which essentially says the global reserve currency is not a depoliticized money. It is a political money. And if you are not in the good graces of the U.S., your savings account is vulnerable. So what happens? You better believe those folks sell treasuries and buy Bitcoin or gold or some other non-sovereign asset. And so, now that I brought up gold, I think that the fight coming here is a global monetary reserve asset fight. Is it going to be another attempt at gold? Is it going to go straight to Bitcoin? Is there going to be some new, BRICS kind of thing, CBDC kind of thing, Bancor 2.0, like a basket of currencies, which is what we flirted with in the 40s? I don't know the answer. I think gold will be attempted somewhere. I think China will try. I think the BRICS will try. But I think ultimately Bitcoin has, on balance, the best properties to serve this role in the future. If that happens, what happens to the U.S.? Well, in many scenarios, this is good for average Americans. Very good. The short-term transition will be painful. Goods will cost more. You can't just teleport factories from China to the U.S. overnight. You can't upskill employees overnight. So there will be a cost associated. But I think over the long term, a Bitcoin-backed dollar or it can be a free float dollar as long as the U.S. government holds enough Bitcoin to give confidence abroad. That's the key. If they think the U.S. cannot manage our currency well, then the confidence goes down. And why would you want to hold our debt under those scenarios? So add it all up. Bullish Bitcoin, bullish middle America, bearish financial parasites, coastal elites, the types of classes that benefited over the last 50 years. The tides are turning, and our administration is upfront about it. Bessent in recent interviews said, hey, it's time for Main Street to take a turn for the next 4 years. The financial elites have had their time in the sun.
Yeah.
Absolutely true. Look at the wealth disparity.
Yeah, but do you think that requires a level of sophistication from the Main Street individual, whoever is that demographic, to understand what's going on? Because again, in short term, it's hard to endure expensive groceries, etc. In the meantime,
I agree. I don't think it requires sophistication. I think what happens is net increase in jobs locally for labor.
Okay.
Now the question would be, in a new manufacturing environment where robots are doing the manufacturing, we don't just get factory workers back on the line. That's not happening. Number one, it doesn't pay well enough. Number two, robots will do it better. And so it creates creative destruction, like any changes in the market. Old jobs leave, crappy jobs. And hopefully we can upskill our employees to manage the robots for them to make things. So that's like on the human side, the wealth distribution side that they're driving towards. Another current here that's very important is the geopolitical significance of some industries. During COVID, we found out that, our supply chains are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Our medicine comes from China. Our photovoltaics come from China. Critical inputs to our chips and all technology comes from Asia and China. And so those type of things need to be onshore, or at least in friendly Western districts, if we want to be okay in a world where China is a rising power and potentially a hot conflict with the U.S. at some point. And so you add those two things together. Chaos is inevitable, but change is inevitable. And the other scenario we talked about is the train goes flying off a cliff. So
if nothing's done,
in
terms of the trade deficit
continues, dollar continues to weaken, confidence in buying our debt goes down, and ultimately the U.S. has to print new money to buy our own debt, which blows out our currency.
And right now we're printing money because we are printing money, right? We're just not having to print as much because we don't have to buy our own debt.
That's right.
Okay.
And what they're also trying to do is get the 10-year rates down, interest rates down, because we have to roll over a bunch of our own sovereign debt from, let's say, 2% up to 5-6%. That costs a lot of money for the U.S. government, and interest on our debt has now exceeded defense as a line item. Everyone wants to bring down defense. Sure. I think we're going to spend more on defense to modernize. However, it just means that it's a huge line item on our balance sheet, and it would be growing and growing and growing if they don't get rates down. Taking the 10-year down also means that the stock market should go down. Now, there's some totally wild stuff going on in the market. I don't want to overstate my grasp or confidence in any
there's so many variables.
Outcome.
It's almost like trying to decide. It's like trying to predict the winner of I don't know, like even before the season begins, like, who's going to win the championship? And say, let's take baseball right now, since that season's just underway. And you might have an idea based on last year, but there's injuries, there's rookies that you don't know how well they're going to do. There are trades that occur.
That's right.
There could be a coach that has a heart attack, right? There's way too many. It's like trying to predict weather. So, trying to predict like the minute, and by minute I mean even month to month activity of how Bitcoin or the market is going to do. Like, there's so many moving parts here, where you just introduced a factor of lowering the 10-year or rising the 10-year. I can't remember.
We want to lower it,
but that's potentially going to lower the stock market.
Yes.
Prices. Like, I didn't know that. But there are just so many variables. Like, I personally get confused. I think we need one of these well-made YouTube videos with graphics, kind of like putting all of this in visual format, so that I don't know, that helps me anyway.
Yeah, we should cover this actually. It can be simplified dramatically. So typically bonds and stocks are inversely correlated.
Okay.
So the easy way to explain it is, if I can get 5% on a 10-year note, meaning I'm lending the government my money for 10 years, and I get a 5% return every year on those dollars. That's my essentially risk-free rate of return.
Yes.
Risk-free defined as, we don't assume the U.S. government will be defaulting, so we should guarantee the 5% a year. Then you have to look at, okay, what is the interest rate, what is the expected inflation rate? Hopefully it's less than 5% a year. So you're getting a real return on that 5%. Then you say, well, if I can guarantee myself 5%, then why or what amount of risk do I want to put above that 5% in the stock market, right? So if I'm taking on equity risk, I hope to return much more than 5%.
What's equity risk mean?
The price of the equities that you buy going up or down.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, companies can do better or worse. Macro conditions can change. Right now, the PE ratios are super high, which means historically it's a bad time to buy equities. And so you rejigger those things, and if the 5% becomes 6%, becomes 7%, whatever the 10-year is, you would be selling your equity positions to acquire more of that 7% or 5% guaranteed return. Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's your risk-free hurdle rate. So equities must outperform that by a significant margin, because you're taking on more risk.
Take the risk.
That's right. So that's why those two variables are related. Right now, the 10-year went down a lot, below 4, and then it spiked back up. So there's clearly some, I assume, short-term dislocations in the treasury market. Most likely hedge fund or two blew up and they had to be a forced seller of treasuries. So I don't want to look at the short-term noise, but that's historically how that works.
Did you study this? Were you a finance major or something?
No, I went to Carlson Business School at the University of Minnesota, but I did not study finance at all. I took a single accounting class. The rest was an entree minor, and I majored in sales and marketing.
Okay.
All my finance education, monetary theory, everything is self-study. I found Bitcoin in 2017. I bumped into it a few times earlier, like most people did, but it started in serious fashion in 2017. I made a bunch of money selling all the altcoins, trading all the altcoins, and then 2018 I lost a bunch of money because I did not know what I was doing and the market corrected. And then I had a decision point, which was, do I just quit, tail between my legs, chalk it up as an expensive lesson, or do I study what this thing is? And I obviously chose to study what this thing is. So I went crazy mode for months on end, reading multiple books a week.
What is that?
Yeah.
I want to know more about that. What does that look like? Does that look like did you have a day job at the time?
Yeah, good question. So I was running a business
Yep.
called the Yoga Nomads, which was an online platform teaching business skills to wellness entrepreneurs.
Okay.
So think like the best yoga teacher in Minneapolis, they don't make really any money at the studio. And if they want to make money, because they're skilled, they're in demand, they're very good, they need to take their own business into their own hands, which means premium products. It could be a retreat, it could be trainings, it could be workshops, it could be one-on-one, it could be an online platform. But essentially, yoga teachers need to be business owners and treat their business that way. And so I essentially taught high school or college level online business skills to that niche to help them build real businesses. So that's what I was doing at the time. Found Bitcoin, realized that this is going to take over my life. So I essentially took myself out of the business, and it was cash positive for many years. So that business just slowly declined month over month as I gave it no love, but it paid me and my wife to our living expenses and allowed me to career transition. And it allowed me to be an obsessive psycho 15 hours a day for months on end studying this.
Serious? 15 hours a day?
Easily. Yeah.
So
like wake up, go to bed, nonstop.
Oh, you wake up, you have a cup, whatever you do, and then you maybe do a little yoga, a little sun salutation or something, and then you pick up Friedman or Hayek or I don't know what you read. I mean, what did you do?
I dabbled with the Austrians, but I went through all the standard Bitcoin books.
Okay.
I read some Austrian texts. I read Graeber to get a counterpoint.
Who's that?
David Graeber wrote Debt, the First 5,000 Years.
Oh.
So he essentially claims that money emerged as a debt obligation in hunter-gatherer societies, and money is debt. Whereas the Austrians would say that money emerged as a commodity found in these societies. I think I have to plug Nick Szabo's essay, Shelling Out, early 2000s, so pre-Bitcoin. He found that how money emerges in a primitive society is first we identify a rare object. Let's say it's a unique shell, or we have this new process to create glass beads, some sort of scarcity. And we hold on to it because we like it, because it's unique, it's cool, it provides social status at first. Then that commodity becomes understood that it has value because people know it provides social status. So now we all intersubjectively agree that this type of unique shell has value in our society.
So money was created not as a unit of exchange, a store of value, but as a collectible because it was cool.
Correct. In hunter-gatherer societies, you do not need a medium of exchange because you can trade with kin groups. You trust people. So if there's high trust, there's a low need for money. Okay, so money essentially solves trust between counterparties that don't need to trust each other because we have a shared medium that works across trade.
It also serves to grow wealth because I can have a number in my bank account or even gold bars under my bed, and I don't need to have a whole bunch of whatever commodity is valuable. I don't have to have a barn full of whatever.
It eventually evolved into an abstract medium.
Yeah.
So first it was commodity money. Then, okay, if this commodity money is valuable, then we can start to trade with it.
But that was a secondary benefit, you're saying? or
It
tertiary.
took center stage over time. I
Yeah.
would think of it as an evolutionary process.
Uh-huh.
Humans are evolving alongside the money. And we went from the collectible store of value into a medium of exchange, which would mean 2 shells for a goat.
Yeah.
Right? So now you can trade. That increases economic activity in your tribe, but it also allows you to trade with other tribes.
Yeah.
So maybe you live in the plains and you're like a nomadic pseudo-agricultural society, and you want to trade with the mountain tribe who have different resources because they're goat herders in the mountain. Right, so now you can trade across groups, and you're using a medium that both parties can agree is valuable.
Sure.
There's medium of exchange.
Yeah.
Keep going, you end up with unit of account. That's the last to emerge. As soon as a monetary commodity is as widely distributed as possible, it's universally agreed upon, you can start to price things in that commodity. So that part comes last. And so that evolution started way back then.
I just didn't know
continues
that
today.
Money as I know it today wouldn't have been invented for this purpose, but came about organically, motivated by some other original purpose.
That's right.
That actually, in a way, reminds me of Bitcoin, because I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong because you know more about this than me, I don't think Satoshi foresaw all the benefits Bitcoin was going to provide.
Definitely not.
He didn't know, she didn't know, whatever, that it was going to help stabilize the grid.
Correct.
You agree?
100% agree. Satoshi had no vision of this.
Yeah.
The early writings is all we can go off of. So I don't want to say he had no vision. There's no published text from Satoshi indicating he had any understanding of this. I view that as a happy accident. It was not intentional. It just created a positive externality, which we discovered later.
Yeah, that's when I've had a few cementing moments of my Bitcoin affirmation or Bitcoin belief or whatever. And that was one when I just saw how the universe, right? So that happened to be a force for, well, one, for world peace, because there's less to fight over if you're not fighting over monetary hegemony. And then two, stabilizing a grid when, if a nation state should, that structure should falter in time, which I believe it will, then what's going to keep the power on? Well, if we all use Bitcoin, that was a light bulb moment for me.
I think there's 2 points to tease out here. This is, and let's back up. Mining is the last thing people grasp for Bitcoin. And it's very complicated because you have to have a foundational understanding of how energy markets work. Energy markets are as complicated or more. I would lean towards more complicated than Bitcoin. And so when Bitcoin mining started to take on a large percentage of global energy demand, roughly 1% to 2%, people started to freak out and say, well, why are we doing this? That's too much energy. Shouldn't we use something else, right? Almost all of those critiques are horribly uneducated critiques because the people making those comments do not understand how energy grids work. So I just want to preface it by saying if you came to those faulty conclusions, it's okay. You're in good company. Many people start that way. Then you start to go down the rabbit hole.
Because it was alarming at first. Like, you mean this crazy internet money is using as much power as Sweden? Yeah. Like, what? That's nuts. And then when you have a lot of climate alarmism, anyway, so just also offer some justification for people's alarm.
That's right. And I think those type of stats are flagrant data abuse used to elicit an emotion. Why would we ever compare a future monetary reserve asset that could stabilize grids and make world peace?
Well, they didn't see it that way. I mean, there's no way they saw it that way. They saw a novel form of money at best, if not a crooked way of doing crime, probably more realistic.
Important point.
So, but I'm with you, but that's not how critics saw it.
Right. And to summarize your point, if you assign no value to Bitcoin, then any energy use is too much.
Yeah.
If you assign X value to Bitcoin, then there should be an energy budget that we feel comfortable with.
Correct.
Clothes dryers in the U.S. use more energy than Bitcoin and more energy than Sweden and more energy than Argentina. Should we get rid of clothes dryers in the U.S. because they have an energy cost? I think a lot of people would say no because they derive value from those things. The same is true with Bitcoin. Now, going back to energy, it provides two things for our grid. One, it provides stability, which you mentioned. And a key point here is the matching principle of energy. When you create energy, you need to have an equal amount of demand for that energy. The reason is you cannot transport electrons and you cannot store electrons very efficiently. People will say, yeah, but there's electrical wires. There's batteries. Number one, batteries are extremely expensive, even though they're, quote, getting cheaper. It's not cost effective to store them. And moving energies long distance has a high rate of loss, simply due to heat. So you're just sending electrons over a wire, and that produces heat. That heat loses energy. So the farther you go, the less energy you can transport.
Yeah.
Simultaneously, it's very expensive to produce long distance transmission lines. And so energy is not a globally fungible commodity. You can't produce solar power in the Nevada desert and then send it to Minnesota.
Okay.
Would never happen. So the demand has to happen locally.
Yeah.
And so that's point one. Energy is not fungible. There's little silos where it's expensive or cheap. The Bitcoin miners flock to the cheap places and they avoid the expensive places.
Yeah.
And so what Bitcoin miners do is they plug into the grid and they allow any excess production to go directly to the miners. And let's say go back to Texas. They had a weird weather event. It got really cold there. Everyone turns on their heaters. They ran out of energy and had rolling blackouts. What happens? Bitcoin miners just shut off.
Yeah.
And then they divert that energy to people's homes where it's more needed, and also they'll pay more for it. As soon as the energy demand goes back down, normalizes, the miners turn back on. So that's one of their unique properties.
Right.
Miners can turn on and off very quickly. You cannot turn off a nuclear power plant. You cannot turn off a coal plant quickly. You can with coal, but it takes time. It's expensive. And so that flexibility is very valuable to a grid operator, because what it allows you to do is overbuild production. We can have new energy assets on the grid, which means a total energy increase goes up, so that when we have those high energy demand spikes, we can service that demand. And as soon as that demand goes down, what are you going to do with all the extra energy? You monetize it by mining Bitcoin.
That's
in
also
other
how
words,
it stabilizes it, because it's a fundraising mechanism for power companies.
Exactly. And the grid can sell electrons to the miners with any excess that they have, which makes the whole system more profitable.
Yeah.
And that gives you more flexibility to deliver power to people.
And if our money is dependent on the power grid, you know darn well we're going to make sure our power grid is secure.
Yes, everything is dependent on electricity.
Yeah.
Food, transportation, hospitals.
But there are times electricity goes out where you can still drive to town, buy stuff. I mean, it's a pain. There's the generators and then, this and that.
For like 3 days you can. Then you run out of food and then the city collapses on itself. So yeah, energy is upstream of all human flourishing. It is the single predictor that's correlated with GDP growth or quality of life improvement. And so you can look at life in general, especially human life, as harnessing energy to make our lives better. If you want to do humanitarian aid in a developing country, what do you want to do? You want to make the people rich so they can pay for the things that hurt their life. How do you make people rich? You give them cheap energy. Energy is the master commodity. If energy prices are low, making things is cheaper.
Yeah, is that a correlation causation error? Like, energy consumption is high, the demand is high because they're doing wealth creating activity.
They're highly related. There's some correlation, some causation. It's a complex system. But yeah, it's important to point out that if you're a wealthy country, you'll obviously buy more energy because you can, and more energy means higher quality of life. So yes, I don't want to create the illusion that it's a direct correlation.
But it's a ceiling. Like you can have all the wealth, great ideas in the world, but if you don't have energy, you can't get above that ceiling.
No, and you rely on foreign imports as well. Yeah. So there's a lot of variables. If you're in a developing country in Africa, they pretty much have to import everything. Why? Because energy is expensive there. If energy is expensive, they can't make things.
Yeah.
And if you can't make things, you don't have jobs. So the single leading variable that we can impact is low-cost energy widely distributed around the planet, which brings me to the second crucial point for Bitcoin mining. One is stabilizing the grid by allowing the grid to overproduce. And two is it creates an economic incentive for energy companies to create net new energy assets. And it's essentially a bootstrapping mechanism. The reason is creating energy assets, whether it's hydro or geothermal, it doesn't matter the type. It's very expensive up front, very long time to pay back. So you need a bunch of money, and you need to execute well, and you need to eventually make money, right? If you do that in a new location, you'll have no customers day one. Maybe it takes you 5 years to build the high voltage transmission to bring the energy asset to the demand source. And in that scenario, you're just burning cash. Enter Bitcoin miners. Bitcoin miners co-locate on site to the asset. Could be in the mountains in the DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a great case study.
What's happening?
There's a huge national park there, Virunga. It's a huge source of economic power for the region, very poor region, and they have a bunch of hydro. It's mountainous, rivers everywhere. But there's no real demand there. The city centers are far away. So they went and dammed up a bunch of hydro. They're producing insane amounts of energy, more than they need, but they can't get it to the people who actually need it. Enter the Bitcoin miners. They soak up all that supply in the early days, aka the energy asset owner makes money selling it to the miners. In the meantime, they're building out their high voltage transmission to bring that power to the city center. And during that process, their ROI time goes way down because they're making money from day one to the miners. As soon as that energy asset connects to the grid, the Bitcoin miners are no longer economical because the power asset can sell its energy to a higher price to end users, whether it's manufacturing or a home or hospital, whatever it is. And then the Bitcoin miners, which are just sitting in a shipping container, they pack up and then they go seed another net new energy asset.
Is this what's happening?
Yeah.
So
all over the world.
Bitcoin mining as a whole, like money mining, electric mining, as a whole other dynamic to power. Yeah.
It's bootstrapping net new energy assets all around the world. And most of the time, not most of the time, I don't know the percentages, many of the cases, that energy asset would not exist if it weren't for Bitcoin miners.
So back to the point about people saying, oh, Bitcoin is using all this energy, maybe one of the responses would be, well, it's not taking energy away from places that need it because it's using the excess energy in a place that has an abundance of it.
Correct.
So it's using all this energy in this desert with all this hot sun. It's not like that energy would have been useful to people in LA. It wouldn't have gotten there. You can't just email it there.
And there's two reasons. The primary reason is economics. Bitcoin miners must have low-cost energy or they're not profitable. So we can rely on very few things in this life, but profit motive is something we can rely on because humans are greedy, and that's part of our human nature. There's nothing wrong with that. We want to make our lives better.
Well, they just want to make a living.
That's right.
I mean, you call it greedy.
Yeah, I'd say it to be flagrant. Even if we're all greedy, it's still okay, and there's nothing we can do about it. So we must play within the human nature rules that we're given.
Okay, Anrand.
And yeah, I don't consider it greedy in a negative way. I consider it, I want to make my life better.
Greed is good. I mean, that's been a provocative statement.
Exactly.
For a while.
There's truth in that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean unfettered greed is good at the expense of your neighbors, obviously. But some amount of greed is inherent and good. It drives humanity forward. And so we can rely on the fact that miners only go where there's not end users consuming that energy, because you could never make money in Bitcoin mining if you were competing with a house, right? To give numbers, it's like 20 cents a kilowatt hour in Minneapolis-ish, 12 to 25 depending on where you are and circumstances. Bitcoin mining, 2 to 6 cents you can be profitable depending on how good your machines are.
Wow.
So there's a very large gap there. And so under almost all circumstances, there's no competition. And so Bitcoin mining is a strictly net positive for humanity, simply because it spreads energy, net new energy assets, and it protects our grids when we need the energy most.
Are there any countries in developing parts of the world, other than El Salvador, who's trying to use geothermal from their volcano, but they're kind of written off because people assume that, they're so Bitcoin heavy, they're kind of out there. Besides them, are there any more neutral? Like they're more objective when it comes to what's going to help my people, this country. Like I remember, I don't know. I lived in East Africa for like 9 months, and so I remember there was a hydro dam in Tanzania.
Yeah.
I remember it well because it said put your cameras down because they were so protective of it. We couldn't photograph it. And then I know that there are like these geothermal areas of Ethiopia.
Yes.
And so could a government of one of these countries say, well, let's mine Bitcoin as a nation?
They are right now.
Are they?
Yeah. The region you mentioned has tremendous what's called shallow geothermal. So just due to geology, it's really hot, and you don't have to dig that far to find the heat.
Mm-hmm.
So they dig a hole, stick a pipe in there, steam comes up the pipe, the steam spins a turbine, creates electrons, creates power. They're putting these shallow geothermal all over the country for their own needs, and they're also mining Bitcoin with it.
In Ethiopia?
Yep. Ethiopia, Kenya, Nairobi, DRC, they're all massive.
Okay, and then
Zimbabwe.
So I don't know how much money they're earning from mining Bitcoin relative to their budgets.
Small. Today's small.
Yeah.
They're just getting started. But what's cool about those regions is that they do not have the capital base internally to produce the energy assets. And so they've relied mostly on NGOs and foreign investment. And you know this probably better than I do. It's not easy to get foreign dollars to take the risk, geopolitical risk, in developing countries to deploy a bunch of capital. The NGOs don't have much money. It takes them forever. And they've done almost nothing, relatively. And Bitcoin miners have a profit motive. And so they have all the incentive they need to make it happen, and they are. I like to shout out a company, Gridless. I know the founder. They're doing incredible work in Africa. And they're essentially solving the last mile problem of energy in Africa, which is to say, most of the cities are electrified, but as soon as you get out of the city, the population density goes down. And so it's not cost effective to run high voltage transmission lines to the middle of nowhere, not cost effective to create a large power generation facility in the middle of nowhere. So they just don't have power. Enter Gridless. They come and they create microgrids, dam up the tiniest little river you've ever seen, throw some miners in a shipping container. What happens? Now there's power there. The whole village gets essentially free power.
Or if this was like a Civilization video game, you would just put like a Bitcoin miner here, and suddenly the lights would turn on in this little village.
It's exactly what's happening.
Yeah, they're going to have to add that sprite or that item in those video games now.
Absolutely.
Like, oh, we don't need to build a power plant. We just need to put in some Bitcoin miners, and then suddenly we'll have electricity in this part of our city.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
Civ 7's great, by the way.
Is it?
Maybe in Civ 8 they'll add the Bitcoin miners. I agree. It's going to be a great thing to build.
You know what? Let's talk about going back to something we mentioned earlier. Because I thought of the South Park episode where you have the underwear gnomes. Remember that one?
I don't know that one.
Remember that one? The underwear gnomes? Where they go in and one of the boys are like, no, the underwear gnome is going to come if I stay home from school or something. And everyone's like, what are you talking about? It was kind of like a Mr. Hanky thing where one of the boys believed in these and the other kids were like, whatever. And I think it was Cartman. He's like, no, the underwear gnomes come and then they take your underwear out of your drawers, out of your like dresser drawer, and then they just go away. And then they catch these gnomes, which look like the little Norwegian lawn gnomes. And then sure enough, like they come in singing this little song, and then they go into the drawer and they take the underwear and then they leave, and then they catch them and they say, well, what are you doing why are you underwear gnomes? What are you taking this underwear for? And they show them a graph. And they say, step 1, take underwear. Step 2, and I can't remember what step 2 is, but step 4, or maybe there's 3 steps. Step 1, take the underwear. Step 2, step 3, profit. And they just skip step 2. And so I'm intrigued with that step 2, so to speak, where we're in this point now where the United States is like pro-Bitcoin, at least in terms of a lot of what they're saying, and the huge financial giants, many of them are now speaking about Bitcoin in a positive light. Bitcoin is digital gold. Bitcoin is whatever. I'm interested in how we went from a few politicians saying this is going to threaten the dollar, to now the U.S. The president has spoken favorably about Bitcoin and other crypto, and now these financial leaders are as well. How did we get to that? What was the transition in there? What was the step through? That was a long way of asking that.
I think the process is the same for individuals as it is for corporations, as it is for governments.
But it's still not a threat to the dollar? Did they figure out a way to tame, so they think, Bitcoin?
I think it comes down to that question is TBD.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality on the ground is that Bitcoin's here, it exists, and it's not going away. And if that's true, you have to make a decision.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to try to fight it, or do you want to join this thing?
Yeah.
And any sort of calculation ends up with you should just buy it.
Yeah. Okay.
Because if Bitcoin is what we think it is, it's going to go way up, and you don't want to miss out on that. So you should just own some. Doesn't mean the government should go all in. That would signal weakening confidence in their own monetary hegemony. But they should, at a minimum, all governments should, at a minimum, hedge their bets. And say if Bitcoin has a 2% chance of being the next global reserve asset,
mm-hmm.
which happens over time, the dollar will not be that forever, just like the pound wasn't, just like the Swiss, or not the Swiss franc, just like the Dutch currency wasn't, just like whatever currency before that. And so if there is going to be a change, you should say if it's a 2% chance, I should own 2% today to hedge my bets. I think that's a starting place for most governments today. They're not going all in. They're just, inching towards the future. And I think we should all take this as a bending of the knee. They're saying it's not going away. The best move is to buy it, not to attack it. And that's happening everywhere. And so,
how do you see Bitcoin as a prominent tool, a prominent and continually growing financial instrument, without looking ahead 50 years and seeing it's going to eat your currency?
Yeah. Let's say it will.
I guess they see it as gold. They don't see it as fiat, as a threat to fiat, the way gold isn't a threat to fiat today.
There's a world in 50 years where Bitcoin's here and it's worth a lot. And we still use dollars day to day.
Yeah.
I don't think governments are going to give up their ability to manage payments because it provides tremendous power.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an acceptable set of trade-offs for humanity. We don't have a payments problem, at least not in the West. In Africa, there's like 2,000 payment networks and they don't talk to each other. That's a problem. But they're just starting to use Bitcoin over Lightning Network. And that's one payment protocol to rule them all. So we'll solve that problem. We do have a capital preservation problem, meaning how do you store the fruits of your labor into the future? How do you arbitrage time? That's the key point with savings. And so right now you could buy bonds at 5%. Well, inflation's about 5%, so you're not gaining anything there. You could take risk in equities. Maybe you get a little bit of a return over time. You could buy real estate. Well, real estate just keeps up with inflation, more or less, so does the stock market. You could buy gold, more or less keeps up with inflation. But generally speaking, the world has a very hard time storing their wealth. And I gave you those numbers from a U.S. point of view. Most of the world cannot buy the Mag 7 or our S&P 500 index or U.S. real estate or whatever premium asset we want to describe. And so they're starving. They'll take dollars because dollars outperform anything they can get a hold of, which is why stablecoins are so popular. And so it comes back to capital preservation. Bitcoin is the apex predator of monetary store value. There's 21 million, numbers not changing. With a fixed supply asset and unlimited demand, the number goes up. As more people buy it, that's going to continue. And so it's more of a, we have to save our own ass. Even if the dollar's gone in 50 years, we don't have 50 years at this current rate, not even close. And so what if the government buys 1% of their budget in Bitcoin and Bitcoin goes up a lot? That's going to help with the debt.
Yeah.
And there's also some ideological reasons to support the dollar. I think the Trump administration is not super aligned with Federal Reserve style money, fiat money. And so there's some ideological points of view that says, hey, we don't need the Fed running the global currency. Why don't we have another asset? Why don't we just allow people to choose?
So go back to a backed dollar.
You could. I think there's a lot of options in what this could look like.
It used to be gold and silver backed money. We could
Correct.
go back to a Bitcoin backed money.
Correct. And periodically we shift between hard money and soft money. Hard money being fixed supply or metals historically, limited supply, to a free-floating fiat currency. We usually go there when we need to print money for a war or a financial collapse. Oftentimes, those are politically motivated.
So the argument for fiat is that it provides, or at least a flexible money supply, is that it provides flexibility.
Correct.
And it can be abused, of course, but so can aspirin, and I thank goodness for that when I have a headache. So if we want to live in a world that's not so rigid and stuck, and can soften the blow of a depression or whatever, we want fiat or flexible. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I agree with the overall premise, but I would emphasize that the abuse potential is historically large, and that's never going to change.
Yeah.
And so the argument would go, hey, if we have a fixed supply asset and the barbarians are at the gate, our whole civilization's gone if we don't raise the funds necessary to defend ourselves. I think that's a good starting argument. Mm-hmm. Then you would say, okay, what do? We can tax our population, mm-hmm. or we can print new money if we can't tax them enough. And I would fall on the side of, I don't think that humans will say, no, I'd rather we all die than give up 10% of my wealth.
Yeah, we always had wars before. We always found a way to afford war.
Correct.
Before the Federal Reserve.
Correct.
Yeah.
What I would say is since 1971, when we left the gold standard officially, we've had a bunch of credit card wars. These are non-popular wars that there's no way you could charge Americans if they knew the cost mm-hmm. to go send our brothers and sisters to die in the Middle East. That's insane. And I don't remember the exact stat, but the first decade or two in the Middle East was like 50 to 100,000 per family in the U.S. Do you think we would pay that to go die in the Middle East? No. So the U.S. government manufactures consent for these wars through propaganda. 9/11 leading to Iraq.
They only need to get. And this is where I think democracy is just, or representative democracy as we have it right now, is it's such a bottleneck. It's such a, we talk about the rise of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin as being such a step forward in monetary technology and just info sharing technology, because there's not one point of risk.
Correct.
But in a representative democracy, you don't need to convince the country. I mean, it's nice if you can, but you only need to convince X number of senators or representatives. So it just narrows how many arms you have to twist.
Exactly right.
Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we claimed weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. We knew that was false, but we did that to scare people into going to war.
Yeah.
That's not a new strategy. That's been the strategy since the beginning of time. And what Bitcoin serves as is a check to that unlimited monetary power that leads to unlimited wars that aren't popular.
Is it either or? Either you're going to have a flexible monetary supply or you're not.
I don't think it's an either or. I think Bitcoiners would say that one money to rule them all, they all go away. I think it's more like if there's monetary choice and the U.S. government is printing money that people don't agree with, on the margin, they will shift a percentage of their assets.
So just by having
Bitcoin.
A hard money as a competitor to
Correct.
The fiat flexibility, because there are other arguments besides war, the barbarians at the gate. There's also, if there's a crash, we can soften the crash by printing some money.
Yep.
You may not agree with that approach. You may see it as paying Peter to pay Paul, or just sweeping under the rug a problem that we're going to have to address when it's larger. But it does seem to, stem the tide.
Yeah. Let me take this one. 2 points to wrap up on gold and hard versus soft, mm-hmm. and what if there's both. 1933, we're right on the heels of the Great Depression. America's in rough shape economically, Dust Bowl,
mm-hmm.
etc. What do? We make owning gold illegal. Why do we do that? We closed the exit valve and we locked all Americans into the soft money. Government prints outrageous money. Everyone gets devalued. That's socializing the losses mm-hmm. of a financial collapse. And that was a strategic move, because what would have happened? Individuals would have saved their own ass by buying gold. And in the period where they wouldn't let Americans own gold, gold went up a ton. and Americans couldn't own it. So the rest of the world benefited from gold price increase, and we forced our citizens to pay their fair share to unwind the Great Depression. Next question is, do we need the ability to stem the tides during a large financial collapse? I think the argument is strong that you do if there's a sufficiently large economic collapse. However, why is there a sufficiently large economic collapse? That's because of spending too much in the first place, kicking the can down the road too much in the first place. So 1929 was after a decade of excess. We built up a whole bunch of risk in the system, and then we knocked it all down, causing a huge problem. If we didn't have the ability to build up all that excess risk by excess spending, by printing money out of thin air, we wouldn't have had such a big collapse in the first place. So housing, 2001 tech bubble collapse, what do? We pushed all that into the housing market. Housing bubble goes up, crash in 08. What are we doing now? There's nothing left. We kind of put it into equities markets. They're historically inflated. The only thing left is the sovereigns to take the next bubble, which is where the max pain, that's flying off the cliff, is when sovereign debt crisis occurs.
Max pain.
That's max pain for everyone. And so we don't have anywhere else to go. So the problem is rearing its head now, and we must solve it eventually, which is what the Trump administration is attempting. TBD how that goes.
Is this what economic professors are telling their students?
You should not listen to your economic professors. Your economic professors are drip feeding you Keynesian propaganda.
Not at the Chicago school.
Chicago school may be unique in its heyday. I would say it's a shell of what it once was in the Friedmans of a previous era. Generally speaking, the economic system controls the curriculum.
Okay.
And so you're getting a single point of view which benefits the state. They believe that money is an asset of and issued by the state. I would take, which is called chartalism, I would take an Austrian perspective that money is of the market. The market chooses what money is. You cannot say what money is. We're all using Skittles tomorrow because the government said so. Well, what if I don't want to use Skittles? Okay, so if a money can emerge out of the market, which I think is objectively true, revisionist history, state power, apparatus would say otherwise for their own benefit, obvious benefit. Bitcoin is an emergent money that emerges out of the market, and under equal fair conditions, citizens will choose what they want to choose, and over the last 15 years, they've been overwhelmingly choosing Bitcoin. I don't think there's a way to stop Bitcoin, so that means that the market will ultimately decide if Bitcoin's here to stay or not. And then you have to say, do you think in the future more people will come to the conclusion that they should own this thing? I see all reasons pointing to yes. Everyone has the same capital preservation problem. Every time there's a catastrophe, let's take COVID, print 40% of outstanding dollars. It's 100 and some year old currency.
Yeah, it seems
40% printed. People found Bitcoin because they felt that something was off. So every time there's pain in the market, people start to look for a solution. Bitcoin's a solution. People are slowly realizing it. And right now, Bitcoin is underowned, dramatically underowned. So we're going to see the number go way, way, way up.
What are we, about an hour into this? And you finally said what people tuned in to hear. Number, when moon.
NGU.
WENMUN. I made up the MUN part. They don't do that, but they do.
Yeah, I mean, the whole purpose of this whole industry for beginners is number go up. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's why I came in. That's why 90+% of people do.
Yep.
The key is to understand that there's something else here besides number go up. And doesn't mean everyone has to come to those conclusions, but if you get sufficiently obsessed with this thing, number go up is a background benefit, but the society shift and the society benefits, that's where the passion comes from.
Once you Maslow's hierarchy of needs, once you've got your bag, then you realize, because you're not worried about how you're going to buy food or pay rent, then you realize, and maybe when you're in a more spiritual place, you recognize the benefits of Bitcoin are much more than
correct.
Being able to pay your bills.
Yeah, what is savings? What is wealth? It reduces uncertainty of the future.
It's like I said earlier, it's potentially like world peace. a force for that. I mean, I won't say it will bring it, but it's a force for that.
It's supportive of world peace or less wars that aren't popular. There will still be conflicts.
Another thing, we've been talking for about an hour, and what I was hoping to get from this conversation, I'm pleased to say that we've gotten, and that was this big picture look. Because when we talk about like a flexible money versus a hard money, we talk about the need for a flexible money, or at least the use of a flexible money to raise money for a war or stave off the dips of a depression. Well, these concepts actually have come back to me just by watching a series. And since I've watched a series on Amazon Prime, I'm now an official expert on the topic.
Obviously.
Right? Because I've seen one director's and team of writers' interpretation of what happened in the early 1900s. But I'm telling you, I love this series. It's sort of like the Men Who Built America. I think it's the same team. But it was Titans, The Rise of Wall Street. And so they talk about... and look, whether it's 100% accurate, I don't know. I'm sure there are things that aren't. But I'm sure a lot of it is. And I love dramatic interpretations or dramatic reenactments of... I mean, we love them in true crime and all that, but I love them in these historical things. It really puts me in that place. And anyway, they ran into these same situations of the United States needing they thought, whatever, need. I mean, did the U.S. need to get into World War I? I don't know, whatever. But if they were going to, they needed to raise money for it.
Yes.
Right? And I was struck when hearing that, and then when thinking back about, you know what? The Civil War, they did need to raise money for the Civil War. They did need to sell bonds for that. Like, I remember even in World War II, I think they would sell bonds. And now they don't do that anymore. They don't have to sell. And I just thought about that as you were talking, like...
Correct.
No, they don't need to get the people on board, the population on board, because they can just print all the money they need, right?
Exactly.
Rather than having to get people to buy in. And anyway, but they did raise the money for World War I, and for the Civil War. They and the other example is stemming the tide of a economic disaster in 1908. There was one, I can't remember, but J.P. Morgan brought all his bigwigs together and said, let's inject a bunch of capital. And he knew a lot of fat cats that were sitting on a bunch of money. Okay, we're all going to go and buy. And they stopped a depression like 1908 just by having all of these big bankers go in and buy. So they did what the federal government does, but they don't have to print and grow the monetary supply to do it. Now, his son, Jack Morgan, tried the exact same thing in 1929, and it worked for like a week. And then the popular selling pressure, though, because all these retail investors were now involved, and they were all just selling. It was way too much. And so the crash happened like the following Monday or whatever that was.
Yeah. It's a great historical example.
Yeah.
What I heard was Morgan locked the bankers in the room overnight.
Oh.
It was like 24 hours in a room, and he's like, we need to pledge $25 million, which was a lot at the time, from this room, and no one's leaving until we do.
Yeah, well, I mean, he basically served as the Fed chair or some
Correct.
other person of great power.
Correct.
By being that. And it's fascinating because it's like, it's always like the, I'm fascinated by the concept of dyads in nature, male, female, yin, yang, night, day, left, right, politically, and maybe capitalism, communism, or government, free market, or something like that.
Yeah.
Because what Morgan basically did was the same thing that Greenspan, would
Correct.
do, or whoever, Bernanke at the Fed would do, and that was be the person in charge to help inject capital.
Yep.
And and then he gets a lot of hate, both Bernanke and Morgan. Morgan saved the day, and then they were like, "Yay, Morgan!" And then, like, within a year, the country was apparently so, like, shaken from that crash that they were like, well, we need to get someone who did this. And then they blamed the bankers.
That's right.
And then Morgan was targeted.
He has too much power.
Yeah.
He has too much power. We should have the government do it.
The government should have that power. But then the people who lean right will say, well, now the government has too much power. Anyway, it's like we're always kind of dancing between the two, whether you're
I
voting
agree.
all red or voting all blue, whether you're all about hugs instead of ass kicking when it comes to crime. Sometimes you do need to give a criminal a hug because they haven't been hugged enough. Sometimes you need to kick them in the ass because they need an ass kicking.
Agree.
And this whole development of civilization and evolution of humanity is a balance. Like we're just a teeter-totter trying to balance these forces. And so,
Profound point.
anyway, yeah, there's my little TED talk.
It's absolutely right.
Yeah.
In many ways, Bitcoin is pure capitalism. In many ways, Bitcoin is pure communism.
Isn't it though?
And so,
like it's money for the people,
yep.
and it's out of any government's hands.
Yep, everyone's equal in the eyes of the Bitcoin protocol. It doesn't
Yep.
know who you are, where you're
Yep.
from, race, religion, creed, sexual preference. It doesn't know. It can't know that. So it treats everyone the same. Is this transaction valid? If yes, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also, if you buy it early, you're going to benefit from the upside. There's no bailouts in Bitcoin. That's very capitalist, right? But it is a paradox that way. There's many paradoxes in Bitcoin. And I think your point on dyads is true everywhere in life. And I think humans like to overly simplify things because it feels nice to have a simple answer.
Yeah.
But life is messy. Life is complex. And the chartalism point of view, we need money to bail out, we need flexibility to steer. That's not wrong. It's just a point of view shift. And I think on balance, society is better without that. And the reason is when we have flexible money, it gets abused and we overspend every single time. It will never change. Humans are humans. And when we overspend and we go off the rails, it creates a really large problem, high magnitude problem. And then we bail ourselves out, which just creates a future problem. Okay, so in that world, the economy looks like this, super high.
Yeah, right.
In a Bitcoin world, in a hard money dominated world, doesn't need to be black or white, but dominated, it would be like this. Smaller magnitude up, smaller magnitude downs. And I think what that leads to is a more stable growth trajectory for humanity. Those disruptive periods knock out years or decades. And what if we could just smooth out the growth a little bit more? I think on net, that's better for humanity. And it makes us more resilient as well. We need a capital stock to weather uncertainty. Savings protects you from uncertain events. Your car breaks down, someone gets sick, you lose your job. Good thing I have some savings. That's true at the individual level and scales all the way up to the country. Corporation, doesn't matter. And in a society like we are now, there's no savings.
Yeah.
That means that we're not very resilient. And so paper cuts become infections and we lose our finger.
Yeah.
Okay, so we want a world where people are saving in Bitcoin. All you need to do is make more money than you spend and squirrel away some Satoshis, some Bitcoin every month and build up your capital stock. That makes you resilient as a family, as a city, as a state, as a company. And that's how we produce our greatest works. When we have capital stock so that we can invest in the future. Not only do I look long-term and act long-term because I'm not scared about uncertainty tomorrow, that leads to building a family, that leads to starting a business, that leads to taking risk. And humans are at their best when they're thinking long-term. If you look at society today, I think it's fairly obvious that we're as short-termism, short-term-minded as we've ever been.
You see those accounts on Twitter, the architectural ones, where they say, "Oh, we don't make cathedrals like this no more."
No.
Because we don't want to build something we'll never see finished.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
There's a lot tangled up in there,
Yeah.
but it's clear that humans are at their best when we can think long-term. Better money allows you to think long-term.
What about though, like, maybe this is a different topic, but maybe it's the same, in the same ballpark, but credit and debt. Like, would you recommend saving up to buy a house, or would you recommend mortgage is fine? That kind of thing.
It depends on the timing. I think understanding that, let me knock real estate and then give it a little pat on the back. So people think owning a house is a way to build wealth. Okay? That's not the case. Homes keep up with inflation. And the average person in America, the majority of their wealth is in their home equity. They feel richer because the house value goes up, but selling the house doesn't buy you more goods than it did before. So owning a home is not a good investment. Your primary home is a consumption asset that you consume, that you use, and it can provide quality of life improvements. If you have a family and you want to plant some roots and put a fire pit in the backyard, whatever, I have a family, I care about these things, that's real value. But it is not a financial investment that you're going to get rich from. What you're doing with a mortgage, a 30-year note on your home, is you're effectively shorting the dollar, because you lock in an interest rate today, and over the 30 years that you go by, inflation hopefully will exceed the interest rate that you're paying on your house. So you're shorting the dollar in order to buy a hard asset. Without looking at any short-term moves, that is a good trade to make. It doesn't mean it's a home run investment. It doesn't mean you should go flip houses. Doesn't mean you should have a real estate portfolio. It means that you're shorting the dollar, and that's where the benefit comes from. And so I fully support taking on debt to buy good assets. You shouldn't take on debt to go to Coachella, which apparently 60% of the attendees did a buy now, pay later on their Coachella ticket. If that's not a sign for the times, I don't know what is. But if you're taking on debt to buy a business,
I saw that
good.
on Uber Eats or something. You could do that. They were making fun of that on X.
Yeah, we should make fun of that. We should
Well,
shame
it depends
that.
if it's interest or not. I've done Amazon buy now, pay later because you get 4 free interest payments.
Yeah.
Why not?
If you manage that debt load appropriately, you should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If
Time
it's
value of
interest-free,
money.
You know?
Yeah.
But I don't know if the Coachella was interest free.
I don't know either.
Yeah.
I don't know any of the individual cases here, but the systemic issue is that we're up to our eyeballs in debt. And that makes you vulnerable. That reduces your resilience.
It's crazy how much prices for events are going up too.
Everything, yeah.
Like I remember when this is kind of like, but this gets back to housing prices, right? Like housing has been a good investment for people who bought 20 years ago because it for whatever reason housing went way up. Maybe it happened more in other countries like Canada, but I know in the U.S. like I don't know, they're way up. Do you think that's all inflation, or is there other factors?
Just look at housing over M2 or housing over the stock market or stock market over M2. So the money supply growth.
That's true. The stock market has gone way up too. Okay.
But the stock market since 2001 or whatever, it's only kept up with monetary inflation.
All right, interesting. Okay.
And so the U.S. government likes to tell us CPI. They like to define that as inflation.
Yeah.
That's a basket of goods that they strategically choose, which includes flat screens from China. So fine. The things that we don't care about are getting cheaper because cheap labor abroad makes it. The things we care about, healthcare, housing, education, exploding. So it's not very fair, and the average person should not look at CPI and be like, we did it. No. The things we care about keep going way up because monetary inflation, increase in the money supply, means more dollars chasing the same amount of goods. Price must go up. That debasement is why people feel poor every year and getting poorer, not getting wealthier, because their wages are not keeping up with the monetary inflation. So if you look at the numbers, Americans are squeezed badly. 10% of the top 10% owns 80 or 90% of the stock market. Bottom 45% owns zero.
Wow.
So when people are like, oh no, Trump crashed the economy, and the lefties will take any chance to attack Trump, well, guess what? If you care about the bottom half of the socioeconomic ladder, the stock market is irrelevant.
Yeah.
So we have to be cautious in how we approach this thing. We're in a very vulnerable state, and consumer debt is high, and the things we want are going up.
It's like all these warning signs that Peter Schiff and Ron Paul and all these guys that got big when the internet and social media got big are now starting to come to a head.
Yeah. And if you want to critique those folks, they were right on the direction and the outcome, but they would be wrong on the timing.
Yeah.
And
You're
I think
complimenting Peter Schiff, the biggest Bitcoin troll out there.
I respect his troll game.
Yeah.
I respect his marketing game.
Yeah.
His son worked at Swan with me for a little while.
Oh, he worked
Spencer.
at Swan?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I knew he was a Bitcoin guy for a while, and then he suddenly changed course for some reason.
He's a AGI tomorrow guy.
Are they all just performing?
I think Peter Schiff is an entertainer first.
Yeah.
He's a really bad investor. All his funds suck. Like your grandma buying the S&P 500 on auto buy absolutely murdered Peter Schiff.
Yeah. Huh. That's so true of all kinds of individual managers.
Most hedge funds, 51% of hedge funds underperform buy and hold S&P 500.
Yeah.
All the crypto traders punting on meme coins and the next hot thing and this platform and that, they're all getting wrecked too. 99% of them, if they look back at all their buys, if they would have just bought Bitcoin and never sold, they would be way outperforming. Not even accounting for the tax liability.
Yeah. Let's end with that, because that's going to be a question people have. Yes, Bitcoin. I remember when you were on our panel a couple of years ago, or a year and a half ago in the fall at St. Thomas.
Yeah.
And you're
good discussion.
A co-panel. Yeah, that was really a great one. On our YouTube channel, by the way.
Shout out.
Yeah, that was you and Jeremy. Yep. And Jeremy's an altcoiner, and he said, yeah, I should have just bought Bitcoin and taught skiing lessons. I still remember when he said that.
Yep.
And I was like, let's appreciate the honesty there. But at the same time, there have been some coins that have outperformed Bitcoin, right?
In short periods of time.
If you look at it, I don't know, maybe I'm cherry picking, and I'm not even talking about fart coin or just completely nonsense. I'm talking about maybe Solana or, I don't know. There's not very many actually, but maybe there's a handful in the top 100 that have outperformed Bitcoin in the last 4 years or something like that.
There's narrow cases in predefined time windows where you can outperform Bitcoin for sure. But the challenge is picking which coins, the timing on the way in, the timing on the way out, your tax liability.
But what about there not being a way out? Like, and I don't mean that there's no way out of cashing out and realizing your gains. I mean, you don't need to worry about a way out, because this coin is here to stay, and it will continue to be a good investment even against Bitcoin.
So far, there's none of those.
There are none.
What you see is that some coins can outperform for a single market cycle. There's quite a few that have done this over periods of time.
Yeah.
You take on more risk to achieve that gain, and the best traders definitely outperform Bitcoin. But that number on a percentage basis is really small, and the average people we interact with are not those people. They're not outperforming. And what you see is on cycle number 2, cycle number 3, everything bleeds against Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And so, if I want to be charitable, you should have 80% of your crypto, quote unquote, allocation in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I would say 100 or 99, but whatever. To be charitable, call it 80.
Yeah.
And then 20% play money, and don't break the rule. Play with your 20%, and the goal is to accumulate more Bitcoin, nothing else. And I think that's the right approach.
That actually, I like that, because it would be impossible to continue to out hockey stick Bitcoin, because the run that, say, a Solana or I could point out a meme coin, but like if you look at even staying power NFT projects, right? Like ones that have proven to have kind of gotten over the hump of the popular zeitgeist of. I don't even know where they're at today. I don't know. Like, are CryptoPunks still worth a lot? Probably.
Nowhere near the last market.
They're worth $50,000 a piece, I'm guessing. More than that. That's a lot of money.
He's right. They're down from all time.
Yeah, they're down from the six figures, but they're not going to keep that meteoric rise. So, yeah, even if some of these projects are here and they have staying power, they're not going to continue to go up the way they did. So they'll flatline.
The key point is monetary premium.
And Bitcoin is not.
That's right. The key point here is monetary premium. What percentage of that asset's value do we assign to it as a monetary premium or a store value premium? Another way to say it is, how does that token accrue value over time? Ethereum could be used by 1 billion people, and the token price could stay the exact same, unless people viewed it as a superior store value asset to Bitcoin.
So if there's 1 billion people using Ethereum, and let's say it gets to that point, because you even said earlier, I can't remember if it was during the recording or not, that stable coins are playing a huge role.
Massive.
And that's on Ethereum mostly, I think. So
Tron,
okay.
more than Ethereum, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Ethereum's too expensive to facilitate them. That's a key. The platform play, we should just throw that whole category out. It is not an investable category. They do not accrue value long term. Solana temporarily outperformed ETH, took a bunch of ETH juice. Ethereum's in shambles. It's the same price as 2016. That's crazy. And Ethereum took that. Ethereum took the pumps we just got on all these meme coins. Solana got all the meme coin juice. And so, yeah, temporarily, it essentially just reallocated the crypto market away from certain projects towards Solana. How much fresh net new capital is coming to Solana? Very little.
So does this just speak to how little of a coin's value is determined by use?
Yes.
Because people are still paying a lot of Ethereum gas every day. It's being used as like Base uses Ethereum, and Base is super popular. So
if you priced Ethereum based on gas demand, so there's a reservation demand to use the protocol.
That's what I mean.
Ethereum would go down 100x. It's people saying, I think Ethereum's going to outcompete Bitcoin. I think Ethereum's going to be a store of value asset.
So it's kind of like a gold or diamond, where very little of it is actually industrial use. Most of it is in people agreeing that it has value.
Correct. Yeah, if gold was just an industrial metal, it would go down by 90%.
Wow. Yeah, that I understood.
Yeah. If you look at Visa,
I didn't know that was the case with Ethereum.
Visa moves a lot of money, but the enterprise value of Visa is not very large. Ethereum, let's say, will move a lot of money. Doesn't mean the token adds value.
But you're using the token for gas, so you have to buy it.
A tiny percentage of its current market cap, yes.
Okay.
It doesn't mean the value goes to zero,
right?
But the value goes way down.
So the utility argument isn't very strong.
It's a horrible argument. Ethereum people cling to that argument. They can't be better store of value asset or scarce or settlement assurances with Bitcoin. That Bitcoin has that wrapped. So Ethereum must compete on functionality. However, that is a dead end. This whole thing is first and foremost a monetary technology revolution. Bitcoin was purpose-built to facilitate a better type of money.
Yes.
Ethereum people would say Bitcoin properties are censorship resistance, open, global, neutral, blah, 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 all these things. And they go, well, maybe if we apply that same blockchain over here, we can get those same properties.
Yeah.
That's a mistake. The properties we like out of Bitcoin emerged in the market out of a constellation of technologies,
right?
Including proof of work, peer-to-peer transactions, some fancy math, a few other things, bolted all together in this Frankenstein thing. Emergent of that is the monetary properties that we deem valuable. Ethereum says, let's take that and let's assume it's a general purpose technology. Now let's add some Silicon Valley bells and whistles on it, and we'll just be a cooler money with more features. Well, Bitcoin cannot change and never change and go up 150 to 100x from here. Money doesn't need features. It doesn't need technology features. Monetary features are much harder to create. That's scarcity. That's the assurance that when I put a transaction in the ledger, it'll be there. It's assurance that inflation won't come later. Those are the things that Bitcoin solves. That's why it's going to outcompete everything else. If you want features and functionality, cool. That's fine. That's a noble path. You will be a enterprise software 2.0. It is a very marginal improvement in society. Cool. Yeah, you make better enterprise software.
Well, I think stablecoins are more than a marginal benefit, and this is what I'm concerned about. Like,
I agree with that. But stablecoins are not accruing value, and they're not accruing value to the platforms.
But I want people playing with these potentials for blockchain. Right? Like, I like stable coins, and I like that people can use them as remittances.
They're great.
I think there are a number of cultural, like the NFT boom. I think a lot of those communities have value. I agree. People, it means something to people. They have parties where they dress up as their, I'm not interested, but they are, and so good for them. Some people love The Walking Dead. Some people love Dogecoin and dressing up as, well, that's not Ethereum, but you know what I mean.
Point stands.
Any meme coin. So, if Ethereum wasn't a good investment, I wonder.
It's certainly not going forward.
If people just understood that Ethereum, Solana are not good investments, I wonder how it would affect, and let's just say that was just known. It's as well known as the years of the Civil War. Would people still innovate on these chains knowing that?
A lot less. I think the energy is around people. Okay, there's a lot of builder energy in Ethereum and Solana. And builders, tinkerers, they want platforms that they can build on.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that they fully understand the monetary theory basing the industry.
Correct.
And so I think most of that energy is ultimately wasted, which is true in any innovation bubble. However, could there be some value coming out of that? Yes, there will be some value coming out of that. But it's orders of magnitude less impactful and less TAM than Bitcoin.
Well, this is, I think, where I might disagree, because you can't do stable coins on Bitcoin.
No. Let's separate things. Let's do a little bit of what are these different things and what's the ecology of tokens. So Bitcoin is a monetary asset, a store value asset, a proof of work asset, a fixed supply asset, whatever you want to call it. It's money.
Yep.
Then you have the platforms, Ethereum, Solana, etc. Then you have stable coins. Then you have NFTs. Those are all very, 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 very different things. Today and in the foreseeable future, stablecoins will be used on these different platforms. And that's totally great. Stablecoins up and to the right, they're going to become popular more and more and more. Why? Because the world wants dollars. It's hard to get dollars outside the U.S. Number one. Number two, it is an improvement in our payment rails.
It's a positive. It's a net positive for humanity.
No question about that.
Yeah.
Yes. And why the U.S. government is so lenient here, because I said earlier that the U.S. government doesn't want to give up payment rail supremacy.
Yeah.
Well, they're in a tough place here. They don't want to give up payments to stablecoins. However, you look at Tether. Tether is a top 5 buyer of treasuries. Buys more treasuries than Germany, buys more treasuries than France. So it is essentially propping up our government's ability to spend, because Tether takes all. What is Tether? You give them a US dollar, they give you a Tether token. What do they do with those USD deposits? They buy short-term treasuries, aka financing the U.S. government. U.S. government realizes it's strategically important for us to keep Tether going. That all makes sense. But in those situations, the value is not accruing to Ethereum or Tron or Solana or the next platform that comes. What happens? Stablecoins go to the least friction, least cost platform. First it was Ethereum. Ethereum's too expensive. Now it's on Tron. Next year it'll be on Shmron, and then it'll be on Flan, and then it'll be on Quan number 76. Doesn't matter. They're agnostic. The product is not the platform. The product is US dollars abroad. That's the key point.
Sure, but that's not happening on, it wouldn't happen on the Bitcoin network.
People are building it on Lightning Network. I don't know if it will succeed or not. I don't care. It doesn't accrue value to Bitcoin.
Right.
At this point, it's not hard to have stablecoin rails. We have unlimited L1s. They're all going to cannibalize each other.
Right. I guess that was just where I was maybe drawing a distinction between seeing developer activity on these other L1s as being a waste or being of value. And I see value in these.
I agree. Percentage
these
waste is the key. Some percentage of that work will be very valuable. What I'm talking about is things like DAOs and financialization on Ethereum, and there's a whole bunch of crazy stuff. And even if it's successful, these are just marginal improvements on our finance stack or our enterprise software stack. It doesn't mean there's no value. It means that they're currently priced as if these are the new monies going to compete with Bitcoin. They should be priced as tech companies. They should be priced as pseudo equities. And I think that there's room for that. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think the majority of the animus that comes out of the Bitcoin camp is, first of all, pretty much everyone stumbled into altcoins. I don't know any hardcore Bitcoiners that didn't dabble with them. And then they realized the follies of their ways. They updated their model, and they realized that Bitcoin is in a separate category. Doesn't mean there's no value. It means what the current market perception is of those platforms is just simply incorrect. And so that's where a lot of the battles come from. Ethereum bros will come up with a new narrative every year to try and outcompete. It's a world computer, it's a this, it's a that. I give sympathy for new narratives because humans are learning what this thing is in real time. So I'm not going to wholesale knock a platform that pivots their narrative. But Ethereum essentially built itself into a situation where they're trying to compete more like Bitcoin. The recent changes, they went to L2 scaling, and they created properties that burn the issuance rate, aka making it more monetary, like making it more like Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But if you make it more like Bitcoin, by necessity, you make it a worse platform.
I see. Yeah.
And so those trade-offs are fundamental.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is extremely monetary asset.
Yep.
Ethereum, let's say it started out extreme platform. Now Ethereum's inching more towards Bitcoin to try and accrue monetary value, trying to find a way to accrue value to ETH. That's a tall ask. Now ETH is stuck in the middle. Bitcoin's money. Solana's a better platform because it's cheaper. No one gives a shit about decentralization at all.
Right, right.
You don't need it either.
Yeah, developers just want a product that's they're going to be able to do their project
Correct.
on.
And you don't need a Bitcoin level decentralization to facilitate anything other than money.
Yeah.
And so that's where the design principles of Bitcoin make sense for Bitcoin, and they don't make sense for the other platforms.
Yeah.
Decentralization is expensive, extremely expensive, and you should not be willing to bear that cost unless it's absolutely needed.
So you continue to see altcoins, these other platforms, as incubators for these other blockchain-based.
I think that's the most charitable way to view it. I would align with that. I think most of it's noise, but that is true also, right? There's a lot of smart people ramming their heads at problems. Something's going to come out of that.
Yeah.
But relative to the spend or the effort, I think the returns will be pretty sad over a 5-10 year
I kind of like
period.
the testnet argument too, that these other L1s are. It allows Bitcoin developers to see what works over there.
Yeah.
Let's try it here, that kind of thing.
I think there's some truth to that. I think there's fundamental differences in the platform. So the critique against that would be, well, we're not seeing a lot of that come to Bitcoin, which is true.
Yeah.
But Bitcoin, the asset, can be unencumbered from Bitcoin, the platform, or Bitcoin, the network. It's very important to differentiate. Bitcoin, the asset, is the best asset in the history. Not only is it performing the best, but it has the monetary properties, which we know through extensive monetary theory, which will become adopted at the highest rate. The network itself, because it's both, it's also a payment network, a settlement network. And the payment network, settlement network of Bitcoin, the base layer, does not facilitate payments very well. It's horrible for payments. It's more like Fedwire or more like final settlement with gold or something like that. But you can add technology layers on top of Bitcoin, on the side of Bitcoin. And in order to do that, you increase Bitcoin, the assets functionality, but you decrease the base layer properties of a store of value asset. So you give up a little security, gain transaction speed.
We could go on and on. Like this is actually where I'd love to maybe at some point have you back with someone who does know a lot about these, because we could go into wrap Bitcoin then. Like, well, then get the best of both worlds. You got the Bitcoin asset wrapped into Ethereum, which is better for payments or something like that.
I would say better for financial applications. Taking on an on-chain loan or something like that.
I don't know if that's a good blend, because I've heard people. I've seen people on X when Michael Saylor was talking about how the government was buying Bitcoin, and everyone was in the comments saying like, no, they're not. They're buying wrap Bitcoin. Saylor, this is not real Bitcoin. And I don't know where you stand. We don't need to go there right now, but I am interested in teasing out that Bitcoin versus crypto kind of conversation, and maybe we'll have you back to do that some more. But we're out of time here, so let's say thank you for coming on. This has been super enlightening.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, covered a lot of great ground, and looking forward to the next time.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
See ya.